Good morning, 300 students. Welcome back. We're about halfway through the class now, and I'm really excited about the way the course has progressed. All right, so let's talk about a couple things I asked you to think about. I think we've got something going on in the news that's bridging last week and this week well. And remember, I asked you, we're switching the modules around a little bit. I would like this week we're going to be doing school and discipline, and so all the stuff that's in regards to that on the course site. That's what I want you doing. Next week we'll do the desegregation stuff. Your paper, however, remains in the same place. Next week, next Friday, is your next paper on issues in education. Okay, let's talk about school and the law first, and then we'll move into some of the topics for this week. Really interesting responses, really interesting papers. There's a few that I really want to tease out. A lot of very specific responses to the drunken pirate case, which is great. It's just fun to say, drunken pirate. Here's the deal with that case. The takeaway from that one is I need you all to understand, as you head out into your job, that the expectation for public life of a teacher is different than any other professional, right? Somebody along the way will probably tell you in your training, never have a beer in the town you teach in, which seems on the surface preposterous. Like, I've been teaching all week, I'm tired, I feel like going to Applebee's and having a Bud Light with my Bloomin' Onion or whatever the hell they make at Applebee's. Like, I'm an adult, I deserve it. I'm not drunk out in public or whatever. All of those things are probably true. However, we need to acknowledge the history of teaching as a vocation, that it has largely been women's work, and that the expectation has always been higher on teachers. You used to not be able to even allowed to be married as a teacher because it was your family and children would take away from your calling. It's very similar to like a seminary. And there is a lot of holdover from that. So even though it's seems sort of silly to have that sort of stricture on the public life of a teacher, it is a reality of the job right now. And so the point of the drunken pirate case, most importantly, is social media is included in that. And the courts have ruled very specifically in favor of the schools for monitoring the way you behave on social media. If you have a Facebook page, I'm not telling you to get rid of your Facebook page. I am, however, telling you to set it on private and do yourself the favor of not posting anything potentially divisive to your school. I have a friend who teaches social studies where I did my teacher training back in Illinois, and the stuff he puts on Facebook, I always reach out and say, Micah, you're just waiting for the wrong parent to not understand your sense of humor, and you're going to be in a disciplinary hearing, because you might think everybody's in on the joke, but perhaps not. So just be aware of the expectations of you, and that social media, according to the courts, social media is entirely fair game for your employer to monitor. All right, now the next thing that we need to talk about is the First Amendment in two ways: freedom of speech and freedom of religion. Let's start with religion because it came up a lot in papers. There are two clauses as far as religion goes in the Constitution, in the First Amendment: the Establishment Clause and the Exercise Clause. What that means, the Exercise Clause means you are free to practice any religion you choose, and no government official or body can stop you from freely exercising any religion you choose, or to not exercise any religion whatsoever. There is no one who can tell you not to. That is what the Exercise Clause means. However, the Establishment Clause also says that there is no government or governing body, public school is included, that can impose a religion upon anybody who is unwilling. So how the courts have interpreted this in terms of prayer in school is essentially the school, if it's a public school, the school is an extension of the state. The state may not establish a religion or impose a religion on other people. Therefore, any display of one religion over any others, including prayer over the loudspeaker, prayer in the classroom, prayer to graduation or whatever, any of those behaviors is considered unconstitutional. If you create any situation in which religious display happens and students are not given the opportunity to avoid it, and that includes just hearing it over a loudspeaker, you have broken the law according to the First Amendment and the Establishment Clause. Now, a lot of people every semester ask me, well, there was a prayer before a football game and graduation every year. Every game there was a prayer. How was that not against the law? And the short answer is it was against the law, just nobody said anything. Nobody turned in because most of the people in the community wanted the prayer. And that's fine if that's what's going on. But you are hearing it from me that the Constitution is not for the community and what they want. The Constitution also exists to protect that one person whose rights may or may not be being infringed upon. So the second somebody says, this can't happen, I'm an atheist, I'm Jewish, I'm Muslim, I'm agnostic, I'm whatever, I don't want this prayer, and you're forcing me to participate just by blasting over a loudspeaker. The second that becomes an issue, the school loses every single time. The courts have not wavered from this, and that's the deal. Now, the advice I give every semester, if you are a person of faith and your faith is important to you, and your faith is so important to you that you wish to teach through it in the classroom, there is nothing wrong with that. However, public school is not a place where you get to do that. There's Christian schools, Catholic schools, private schools, all sorts of places where faith and education marry one another, and you can flourish in that environment. But as far as public education is concerned, that is not a place where you are allowed to do so. That is simply a judgment-free piece of advice for all of you listening. And so if you choose to disregard that advice and you do whatever you want, I will be waiting one day to post your bail and to tell you I told you so. You're not going to get arrested. I don't know why I say it like that. You're not going to go to jail. You might lose your job. Okay. Freedom of speech is the other portion of this. The Tinker case is important. Remember, the Tinker test is from 1969, Tinker versus Des Moines. The kids protesting the Vietnam War. Essentially, the court ruled in 1969 that any freedom of speech is protected as long as it's not disruptive to the educational process. That is an important phrase, especially in today's culture of schools, because the educational process is incredibly strained. Remember, I gave the example of my son's math teacher last week, and that he was just trying to get anything done that he could. Well, if a kid speaks up in his class about something political, that teacher now has full authority to silence that child and say, you don't get to speak your mind because you're disrupting the educational process. So there's a responsibility to that right, I think. That, yes, students have freedom of speech, but there are all sorts of interesting ways that the language of that law could be manipulated to continue to silence and block free speech. And it is our responsibilities as teachers to protect that right, not use this sort of vague educational process as a way of keeping ideas out of our rooms. And the other thing about Hazelwood Kohlmeyer, Bethel Frazier, the Bong Hits for Jesus, whatever that, Morse versus Frederick, the courts have systematically curtailed some of those rights. The school does in fact have a way of declaring what counts as free speech and what doesn't. So keep those ideas in mind. Now, let's move on to this week in the idea of school and discipline. And what I asked you to think about very specifically was this case that has hit the news of Ahmed Muhammad and the clock that he brought to school. If you haven't looked into the case yet, a Muslim boy brought a clock into school in his bag and was arrested for it because they thought it was a bomb. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the sort of Islamophobia. However, it's there's plenty of stuff out there now to suggest that Irving, Texas had a long history of trying to get rid of Muslim influence in their schools. So I think we can take a pretty educated guess that the kid was suspected more quickly than he would have been because he was brown. But that's not quite the point where we're going to fit it into this particular conversation today. What we're talking about this week is school discipline and school-based arrests. And a lot of what I heard, my stepmom in particular saw the picture of the kid in handcuffs and said, how on earth could something like this happen? Well, we have very specific explanations for how it could happen. And to go back to the law, I refer you all to the New Jersey versus TLO from 1980. Some of you wrote your papers on this, and there was a slide on it in the presentation. Jersey versus TLO, girl was caught smoking in the bathroom because she loves Motley Crue. Her things were confiscated by the school, searched, and what they found was like rolling papers and a list of people who owed her money. She was dealing drugs. Whatever. The girl sued and said, well, my Fourth Amendment right of protecting me against unlawful searches and seizures without probable cause was violated. What the courts ruled in that case, and it's so important in the context of TLO, is that in a school setting, probable cause has a much more relaxed definition that we call reasonable cause. And that phrase is incredibly important. Essentially what it means is and probable cause means you can't get pulled over for speeding and the cop says, hey, pop open that trunk, I want to see if you got drugs. There is no reason for him to suspect that. You must have a probable cause. In the school setting, all you need is what they called reasonable cause. You just need some sort of reasonable suspicion that something could be happening in order to go through everybody's things. That's why most of you had locker searches where you had to stay in your classroom and they brought a drug dog to the school. That's why you were able to have your property searched. This counts for you as teachers as well. As teachers, they can go through your belongings under the guise of reasonable cause. So when Ahmed had a bag that was ticking, that was reasonable enough cause for them to grab his stuff and go through it in any way they wanted. You don't have to have probable cause. You don't have to have any sort of evidence that something might be in there. A ticking bag is all that was needed. And it turns out it was a science project. But the law supports the school's right to do that. And now we're getting into this very interesting conversation about that line between civil rights and public safety, right? That we saw, the song and dance we saw right after 9/11, the song and dance we saw right after Pearl Harbor, the song and dance we see every time national security is threatened. Where do your rights end and security of the whole begin? The other thing about Ahmed, though, that's interesting for this week is this picture of him in handcuffs. We have seen since the 1970s a vast spike in school-based arrests. The reality is school-based arrests are a daily occurrence in public school. Zero tolerance policies in particular have replaced any sort of rehabilitation policy. Which means essentially rehabilitation in the 60s and 70s. If it's 3 strikes rule, you stay in school and they try to sort of counsel the trouble out of you. Since the late 1970s, we have seen most of those policies replaced by zero tolerance, 1 strike and you're gone. And most counseling officials in the school replaced by resource officers, armed, certified police officers in the school, arresting children for bad behavior. And we have seen a massive increase in school-based arrests since. So those two things together, the reasonable cause from Jersey TLO ruling and the rise of zero tolerance policies, both created a circumstance in which a kid who brought a clock into school had his bag revoked and he was put in handcuffs and sent to a detention center immediately without even waiting to see if what was inside that bag. That's how that happened. We can keep the conversation about the racial element, which is part of this, of course, but that doesn't even necessarily need to be part of our thought right now. We can handle it simply out of the legality of it alone. The school didn't do anything unconstitutional according to the law, the letter of the law. Now, whether or not the school did something good or bad in terms of our greater sense of ethics is where we need to have the conversation. Should something like this have been able to happen, don't you think it would have been fairer for that kid to be able to unzip his bag and say, it's a clock for science class, and then he's sent to class where he receives a good grade for being a good science student? Yeah. The last thing I want you to think about as you look through this week's materials is this increase in not just school-based arrest, but school removal as opposed to rehabilitation, zero tolerance policies. I have some stats on the slides. the potential for a student to drop out and not finish public school rises every time they have been removed from the environment for discipline. To the point where if you have been suspended or expelled more than twice, it's about a 50-50 likelihood you won't finish school at all. So what I'd like you to think about and talk about in this week's discussions is this essential question. If the most important thing in the world is the education we have to offer these students, why is denying them that education our stock response when they misbehave? Shouldn't that be the last possible outcome, that a student is removed from the environment? If the only thing in the world that matters is the education we're offering them, why would we take it away so quickly and readily when they don't follow the rules? And a zero tolerance policy is a laundry list of infractions, any of which can get a kid removed from the environment. For anything like chewing gum to something, a little more hostile, like fighting, stealing, whatever. If we accept, no, I'm not going to frame it as a question. I'm going to make this a statement. This is what I think. I think we are quick to suspend and expel and remove students from the educational environment because we have not made ourselves aware enough of the potential consequence. Statistically, every time you remove a kid from this educational environment, you are running the risk of them not finishing school at all. So is it actually worth ruining a kid's entire future because they threw gum across your classroom or wouldn't move their desk when you asked them to? Is that really something that you want a kid to drop out of high school over? I think if you're a good and responsible teacher, the answer to that question is of course not. But I also think that we are not aware, we do not frame it with that weight when we manage our classrooms. We have to think about the actual statistical and lived consequences of our management policies, because simply removing a kid from the classroom isn't good enough. We need more. We need to reach these kids and ask them what it is they're acting up over and try to address the behavior, not just get them out of here for the good of the whole, right? That's the excuse. Well, if that kid's disrupting the class, then nobody learns. That might be true on that day, but let's fix that problem. Let's not just get rid of that kid. There has to be a better way. And so part of our task before us is figuring out, well, what is that better way? How do we do this? Because it's not easy. And not every kid, even when they're usually good kids, they're not going to come to school every day and want to learn. Something might have happened at home, right? Something might have happened on the way to school, on the bus. And they are just in a funk of a mood. And especially when you're dealing with teenagers, that mood gets expressed in really unhealthy ways because they're still trying to figure it out. Okay. I'm sorry. Now I'm changing gears. One last thing. I'm going to go back because I forgot. I'm going all the way back to Establishment Clause here, and I'll be quick about this. I did talk about the Establishment Clause. You cannot impose religion. There is another case, West Virginia versus Mergens, I do want to talk about. The courts have also ruled this is a case in favor of allowing kids to have a Bible study after school. There is the Establishment Clause, and it is heavily protected in public education. However, the courts have also ruled that the Exercise Clause also exists. Your students are free to practice the religion they want by themselves. Also, if a kid is a Christian or a Muslim or an atheist, that child gets to practice that religion, and you don't get to stop him or her in the school either. The state is forbidden from keeping people from practicing religion as well. Okay, so that is also, because I thought there was a lot of concern, like, well, kids don't get to be Christian in school. Well, yes, you do. You absolutely do. And the school can't tell you you can't. However, the school, as the governing body, can't impose it on somebody who doesn't want. And so that is sort of the line to walk there. Okay, I'm coming up on 20 minutes. I'm surprised I had enough memory to record all this in one shot. But those are things I want you to think about for the week. If you're not keeping up on Ahmed, please do. And because it's such a fascinating case and so perfectly timed. with what we're talking about. I know Irving is right next to me here in Dallas. I swear I didn't manufacture this crisis simply for as a teachable moment, but man, is it good timing for our class. And so look into the case if you haven't. Think about this idea of classroom management, of discipline and punishment in your schools. Ultimately, what the question for this week is, which is more important, maintaining order in our room or creating an environment of learning? I think both can be done at the same time. However, in practice, it gets sort of falsely paired as one or the other. And a good teacher knows how to do both. And that is what the task before you. Okay. Have a good week. Loving the responses so far. I look forward to seeing the conversation around this, and I will be back next week. Bye-bye.